Welcome to this Killick Explains video and welcome to the first part of a two-part series on an investing legend. We're going to look at some investing lessons from Warren Buffett. Now, anyone watching this video hasn't heard of Warren Buffett. I'm not sure where you'd have been the last 10 years or so, but this is a big year because after decades of running Berkshire Hathaway for a long time with Charlie Munger alongside him, who sadly passed away fairly recently, Warren Buffett's decided to hand over the reins to a new team and a new CEO. All right, so he's no longer CEO of Berkshire Hathaway, the company that he started. It's been a 60-year career, and over that 60-year career, he's managed to turn in average annual returns of around 20%. Which is way above the average from, say, the S&P 500. So, naturally enough, all of his fans, even people who've not come across him, are asking the question, how and what bits of it can we do? Can we be like the great Warren Buffett himself? And I'm afraid the answer in part one is going to be, it's quite tricky. There are certain advantages he had which make him a bit unique, but in part two, fear not, I'm going to look at three ways in which we can all be a lot more like Warren Buffett. Three lessons we can take away from his experiences over 6 decades. So, what are the things that are difficult to do? Let's get the negative stuff out of the way first. So, things you can't really emulate, and therefore don't be disappointed, if you find out you're not the next Warren Buffett. Very few people will be. And here are 3 of the big ones, all right? Number 1, you can't start when he started. Thanks for that, Tim, but there is a reason I'm saying that. I'll come back to in a moment. Number 2, very few people have access to the same cash pool and leverage that he had. More about that in a moment. And number 3, once you get as big and as bad as Warren Buffett, you can actually create a self-fulfilling prophecy in investing terms, which Tim Bennett can't. Now, we can't start when he did. Well, thanks for that. That's obviously true. But what do I mean by that? Back in the day, we're going back decades now, we're talking about a period where value investing in inefficient markets, that is to say, there were information asymmetries, the posh way of saying information didn't flow as freely as it did now, there were no algorithms, there weren't as many people in markets, institutional capital flows were more basically static. Essentially, it's much easier to develop an investing edge, and he and Munger worked supremely hard, were supremely intelligent about their stock analysis and stock picks, and basically were able to make investment commitments that actually now would be pretty tricky to replicate in our world of sophisticated institutional investing, algorithms, and much broader access from retail investors to all of the same markets that Buffett had access to. In other words, if you want to be the next Warren Buffett, you've got to start from somewhere else. Both in terms of timing, that's obviously true, but also where you go looking. Next, he had access to tremendous low-cost, low-risk sources of finance. Cash floats were one of them. But Warren Buffett is called, a value investor, but actually what he often did was buy, effectively, big stakes in companies who effectively became an owner, almost owner-manager of those businesses without necessarily sitting on the main board day to day. So he had a cash float because he bought cash-rich businesses, and on top of that, from his insurance operation, all right, he was able to generate both safe cash flow and leverage. In other words, he could borrow to invest, and he could do it at low risk on his terms over long periods if he wanted to at low risk. Now, if you can do that, what's the benefit? Well, imagine you're buying 100 shares for £100 worth of shares, let's say £1 each for £100 in cash. If they double in value, that's to £200, okay, then you've basically doubled your money. You've turned £100 into £200. That is a good day's work. But imagine for a moment that original £100 was £50 of your own money and £50 borrowed. Now, the £100 investment you've bought with those two sources of capital doubles, your return is actually 300%, because if you were to sell those shares, all right, so £200 of sales proceeds minus £50 of debt, you'd have £150 and you only put in 50 from your own pocket because you borrowed the rest. So that's the power of leverage. And if you've got a long-term, low-cost, low-risk source of leverage, like that insurance business that I talked about him owning in the background for much of his career, that gives you the ability to potentially make those kind of returns. Now, he didn't lever up, gear up necessarily to quite the extent I suggested in that last example, but nonetheless, it's powerful. And that's not something the rest of us, mere mortals, can easily do. And number 3 is when Tim Bennett announces he's about to buy some shares, nobody gets that excited, all right? But Warren Buffett, his status was such and his ability to pick winners was such, and bear in mind he made a lot of his wealth in the last half of that 60-year career, because that's how compounding tends to work over long periods. Bear in mind he could move markets by himself. Just the rumour that Warren Buffett was moving into a commodity, a particular company, right, could actually move the price. It's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. He's almost guaranteed to make money because other people piled in after him, if you like. So just that ability over time to actually move markets. Now, it is a two-edged sword, all right, and regulators get uncomfortable about it and did get uncomfortable about it because essentially the reason I say it's a two-edged sword is that the problem is if people get ahead of you, you end up buying what used to be a great position at a cheap price too late. All right, so it became more and more difficult to do, and I don't envy the people taking over from him because they don't have that ability necessarily. But earlier on in his career, Warren Buffett could make money by simply being in a particular stock and seeing the price move because people thought, well, he can't be wrong. He's never wrong. Right. So basically what I'm saying is we don't have some of the edges that Warren Buffett did, and that's just 3. We can't start when he did and necessarily take the same approach he did in the sort of big liquid large cap space. We can't buy cash float. We can't lever up, gear up, borrow as easily as he did, and we're not him. All right, he was unique, and unique people have unique powers in all sorts of markets, including investing. Now, if that all sounds a bit depressing, in part 2, I'll explain how we can, all of us, be a lot more like Warren Buffett. In the meantime, for any extra information you need, killick.com/resources is where you'll find other videos, the Confidant Quarterly Magazine, and also my guides, including that one, How to Invest in Equities.